Okay, so as I was saying, and I guess I could have just waited or I could have just started earlier. Um, the 11th house, so as you can see here, what do I have here? I have the genie's lamp here. And that's because the 11th house traditionally is called the good spirit. It's called the good spirit or the good daemon, which is what it was called in the Hellenistic period. And it's also always been connected with the fulfillment of future wishes and dreams. In some sources, you'll see it's the house of hope. In some sources, you'll see, you'll see good fortune, fame, recognition, things of that nature, things that we connect with the 10th house. But lately, when we, or, in this modern era, when we look at the 11th house, what we really tend to kind of use it for is groups, which I see primarily in the modern era, but friends. And of course, friendship, it does actually go quite a bit back. So here we come through the era. This is from Deborah Holding, from her book, Temples of the Sky, which is the classic, as far as I'm concerned, on house meetings. So it's called The Houses, Temples of the Sky by Deborah Holding, Houlding. I'll put that in the chat, actually. And I actually even have a copy of it that I will, what's right? Fuck, I'm using the wrong. See, I can't get a G or an H, and I can't backspace. So I was trying to use the laptop keyboard, and I had to change over. Okay, so she starts with Manilius, who's like 7th century. Hope, or is he 4th century? Hope, ambition, triumph, blessed with the lot of happy fortune, the temple of Jupiter. Now, why would he be called that? Why would the 11th house be called the temple of Jupiter? That is because the 11th house is part of the system of what we call planetary joys, or the houses are joys of the planets, or they are places in which the planets rejoice. And so there are 7 specific places in which each particular planet rejoices. Mercury rejoices in the 1st house. Let's see, what is it? Venus rejoices in the 5th. Mars rejoices in the 6th. Sun rejoices in the 9th. Jupiter, which is germane to this particular conversation, is Jupiter rejoices in the 11th house. Saturn rejoices in the 12th. Oh, Moon rejoices in the 3rd. That's the one I forgot. So Mercury in the 1st, Moon in the 3rd, Venus in the 5th, Sun in the 9th, Jupiter in the 11th, Saturn in the 12th. Now, am I missing one? I think I only had 6 planets, but am I missing? Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Yeah, no, I think everybody's connected. Okay, so good luck. The other classicals: hope, attainment of desires, freed persons, friends, gifts, children. Formicus, Maternus. So this is where I guess, one of the first times we hear it called the good spirit, but that's not true because actually Vedius Valens calls it good daemon. Good spirit, favorable because it aspects the ascendant by sextile and is the house of Jupiter. So when they say it's the house of Jupiter or the temple of Jupiter, they're referring to, once again, the joy that Jupiter rejoices there, not that Jupiter naturally rules it. And let's actually talk about joys for just 1 second in this context, because what a joy really is it's a house that reflects the natural signification of a planet. So, for instance, Venus is in her joy in the 5th house. The 5th house is the house of pleasure. It's also the house of children, right? And how do you get children? Through sexual pleasure, right? Sexual pleasure is how you get children. And fecundity, right? You need to be fecund, you need to be fertile. And the womb needs to be wet, right? The womb is a wet place. Venus is a water planet, and so is the moon. So that is another thing that kind of has to deal with kind of Venus as a significator for children, for sexual pleasure, for coitus. The 5th house also for intoxication, theaters, entertainment halls, things of that nature. All of that is fifth house and is also Venus. When we come to the 11th house, then the 11th house as a representative or an embodiment of good spirit, right? So you may notice that the two benefics are in their joy in the 5th and the 11th house, which oppose each other. I'm going to move this for a second so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the first house, here's the 7th. Here's the second house, there's the 8th. Third house, 9th house. Fourth house, 10th house. Fifth house, 11th. Venus is in her joy in the 5th house. Now, ignore this sun, this co-significator thing here in the 11th. But 11th house, that's Jupiter's joy. So notice that Venus is the lesser benefic, and she's in her joy below the horizon, and she's a nocturnal planet. Jupiter is a diurnal planet and the greater benefic, and he is in his joy above the horizon, right? So diurnal planets should be above the horizon by day, and nocturnal planets should be below the horizon by night or by day as well. So something to be thinking about, because when we get to Mars and Saturn, Mars is a nighttime planet and his joy is the 6th, which is below the horizon, and Saturn's is the 12th, which is above the horizon, and he is diurnal. So kind of like what I just did with Venus, Jupiter is increase, growth, enjoyment, but of a different type, enjoyment as a result of plenty, patronage, welcome, right? So patronage especially, benefit, gifts, benefit, help, assistance, right? All of those things are connected to the 11th and are also connected to Jupiter. And then once again, this idea of increase, multiplication of effects. Jupiter is the natural significator for what? Substance and wealth. So that natural kind of thing around substance, wealth, increase, that's connected to the 11th house as well, but not now, right? This is initially connected to the 11th house. And we're going to talk about in a second why. So Al-Biruni, we come into the medieval period, the Islamic medieval period, happiness. See, once again, so this issue with joy, with Jupiter and joy, right? Jovial Jove is another word for Jupiter. Jovial means kind of happy and optimistic. And so that's jovial Jupiter happiness. Friends, praise, love, friendship of women. Okay, because Venus is the natural significator of the 11th, because it's the house of friends, and we find delight in our friends. And so that's what it's a medieval view. That's why I said to disregard the sun that we just saw. That comes from a little bit later. Lily says friends and friendship. So by the time we get to the 7th century, things have kind of condensed itself into friends and friendship. Hope. This is a term you see also with Bonatti. Trust, praise, comfort, promotion by recommendation of friends. So there's this idea of patronage and friends in high places, friends that help us to, or those who help us to attain our goals. Secret hopes and wishes. Okay, hopes and wishes, right? So we still have all of that connected, but it's not quite as, shall we say, prominent as when we look at the more classic things, which are all about hope, ambition, triumph, good luck, hope, attainment of desires, right? So the 11th house is really the house of hope. Modern friends and acquaintances, clubs and societies, objectives in life. So there's our hopes for the future, intellectual pleasures, detached contacts made in day-to-day affairs. I'm going to pause for just 1 second because I have to blow my nose. Wait, oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So we've gone through history, right? We started with Manilius in the 4th century. We've come to the modern understanding of what it's about. But you know that we're really interested, or I'm really interested in the traditional. So as I said, one of the reasons that the 11th house, especially in some of the older sources, was considered to be even more benefic than the 10th on some level. And the reason why is because there are two types of motion in a chart. And I'm going to switch over for a second so I can give you an example of what I'm talking about. Okay. Oops. All right. So there's two types of motion in the chart. As you can see, there is the planetary motion, which goes in the order of the signs. Venus is at 6 degrees of Cancer. She's going to go to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, all the way to 30. Then she's going to go into Leo. All of these planets are moving in this direction. They're moving in a counterclockwise direction along the order of the zodiac signs. Okay. However, now here's the ascendant. What's going to happen is the ascendant is going the opposite direction. It's going in the clockwise direction. That's called the celestial motion. So what's going to happen is, as a result, looking at the 11th house here, with the celestial motion, as Gemini, more of Gemini goes up, goes up into the towards the midheaven. As Gemini goes up, then all of these numbers will start to increase, and then at some point it will increase so much that this sign will be here. At some point Gemini will be here, right? As we move forward, Cancer will become the ascendant. So that means that this outer ring is moving this way. The planets are moving this way. And what happens is that a planet in the 11th house should be going towards the 12th, right? But what happens is, because of the celestial motion, it's going to throw that planet up to the midheaven, right? So let's say we had a planet here in Aries at 5 degrees of Aries. When this ascendant becomes 8 degrees of Cancer, 5 degrees of Aries will be on the midheaven. And so that's what the celestial motion does to the 11th house. It pushes the 11th house to the 10th house and turns it into the midheaven. And so that's why it was considered to be even better, because you have something to look forward to when you have things in the 11th. However, and also because what happens to the 10th house, the 10th house then becomes the 9th. So that's why I kind of did that particular thing. This is a theoretical thing that I'm kind of trying to give you an example of, or an understanding of. But all of this was part of understanding astrology: planetary motion versus celestial motion, primary versus celestial, I think they call it. So the opposite house of the 5th, the 11th, was known to the classical house authors as the house of good spirit. A planet appearing in the 11th house has distanced itself far enough from the ascendant to be seen. Remember when we talked about the 12th, we saw that planets of the 12th, or the time period that represents the 12th house, which is right after sunrise, the sun cannot be seen. And so that's an aspect of the 12th house, of that those things that are in the 12th are hidden from view. And so sun will be, so let's see, so ascendant to be seen in clear vision. So by the time it gets into the 11th house, the planet can be seen in clear vision. And in the rising of the sun will be free of combustion, right? So it will also be at least 60 degrees away, so the combustion won't be a problem. Symbolically, it is perceived to have freed itself of the connotations of captivity and invisibility associated with the 12th, because 12th house represents slavery, labor, forced labor, imprisonment, restriction, and to have moved into the condition of strength, freedom, release, hope, triumph, movement. And so this idea of hope now becomes more understandable, right? Because really what the hope is about is that the hope is about the 11th house turning into the 10th house, right? It's the hope that I will attain my desire, because of course we all think of angles as being the strongest arrival, right? And so when the 11th house arrives at the 10th, then I get my wish, then I get my desire, then I realize my dream, right? And so, and be thinking have you ever seen a story where they talk about, or a television show where they talk about somebody who died young, and they say this was a person, this wasn't just a case, this was a person with hopes and dreams. They always say that. When it's a person who died before their time or something bad happened to them, this was a person with hopes and dreams. 11th house. On some level, that's a special thing, what that person held within them to attain. That could have possibly, that was in potentiality, that could have possibly happened, but didn't necessarily, because it was cut off too soon, right? So that's the way also to be thinking of the 11th house. This was a person with hopes and dreams. Today we call hold on a second. This session resonates with me tremendously. So this person has, so we've got somebody with, Diana has a packed 11th. Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars in the 11th house in my solar return chart for this year. It's okay. So it's in the solar return chart. So you're really focused on future dreams right now. I have Jupiter, Neptune, Venus, Mars in my 11th. So she does have a packed 11th aspect of my Sun, Neptune, and I'm really feeling so much of what you're sharing about the 11th. Now, wonderful, because the thing is, I feel like, sorry. Thank you, Dinah, for making that comment, because I feel like the modern understanding of the 11th has really cut us off from this understanding of what my dreams are, and not what dreams do I go, what happens when I sleep, but what is it I dream to attain? What is it I dream to make happen? And whether or not that can happen. Whether or not that can actually happen. And so we're actually going to look at a few charts. We're going to look at some charts from the aspect of friends and friendlessness. And then we're going to also look at some charts. So, and I'm really interested in this specifically. If you remember, I don't know, Diana, if you were part of my initial study, astrology study, which started this entire thing. But one of the things that I was looking for, oh, fantastic. Then you probably are one of the people who contacted me because I wanted 11th house people. I wanted people who had stuff in their 11th house. Yeah, all right. Because I wanted to see whether or not we could see from the chart whether a person can attain their desires or not, whether the 11th house is strong enough to make the desires come true. And of course, now we know we need to also be looking at Jupiter. We need to be looking at, we're going to get into it, right? But I mean, look, we're only at the third thing, but we've gotten so deep into this concept already. And we need to, because like I said, this is a person with hopes and dreams. That's the first place people go when someone dies too soon. They go to the potentiality of the 11th house. And so we need to be looking at that in a few different ways. Now, in the Renaissance era, if you ever heard of Cornelius Agrippa in his three books on occult symbolism or occult of theory, his books, he's got an actual exercise for coming up with the name of the angel who represents the good spirit of the 11th house. Okay, so the magicians even embodied it in the form of an angel, that you used your own chart to figure out exactly how to find it. Okay, so it's even to that extent. The 11th house, the 9th house, the 11th house, there's all of these possibilities to go really magical with those houses. And that's one of the problems I have that's one of the reasons that I believe that astrology has been kind of castrated in the modern era, is because astrology has a lot of power to do a lot of very interesting, cool things. And if all we're looking at is how it shows somebody's behavior, then we miss out on so much else. So today we call the 11th house the house of friends, but that also implies benefactors, all right? So once again, thinking of Jupiter as a matter of fact, I tend to consider the third house friends who are like family. So our school friends, the people that we grew up with, our neighbors, our school friends, our schoolmates, our best friends in school, people who are like our extended family. Those friends I consider to be third house. And the 11th house, because of this joy of Jupiter thing and this good spirit thing, the 11th house is more patronage, friends in high places. A friend of mine used to talk about, or people who can help us to, like, once again, achieve our goals. Those the support system that we have in place for achieving that which we want. Okay, so all of the symbolism of underpinning the interpretation of this house is favorable. Besides its affiliation with the greater benefic, it forms a sextile relationship with the ascendant, and most importantly, enjoys an elevated position above the earth, rising in diurnal motion, so rising in the celestial motion towards the summit of heaven. In this temple dwells Jupiter. Let its ruler convince you that it is to be reverenced. So isn't that fascinating? That's from Manilius. So wait, it looks like if he's 10 AD, he's first century like Valens is. Or I think Valens is even later than Valens is second century. If the benefics are in the sign of the good daemon, located in their proper places and then their proper faces, when he's saying proper places and faces, he's talking about particular signs. So for instance, the moon in Cancer, sun in Leo or Aries or Taurus, or that kind of thing, and proper faces, it tends to be kind of its position on the ecliptic, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't quite figured that out yet. They make men illustrious and rich from youth. So here's the connection with wealth, wealth and the 11th house, and that's still in the Jyotish. It still is. You want to see the 11th house in connection with the 10th house ruler or other things like that to make the person really big. Even more so if they are trying from the right with a lot of fortune, or sextile with the ascendant. And I think I will talk about that. Shawnice, we will talk about, you will see when I get into aspects, I will talk about right versus left aspects, but I may go into that when we look at some of the things. So he's saying that if there's if it's a right trine with a lot of fortune. So we'll see, help me to remember that, or right sextile with the ascendant. Help me to remember that. Right, the 11th house is the right sextile with the ascendant. So anyway, so we'll see. If they're in a listening or beholding sign, that's something that you'll also get when I talk about signs of the zodiac. They provide even more and greater benefits. If one of the benefics appears in the opposition to the good demon, its house ruler is also present. These stars bring bigger and better benefits and successes. Valens didn't necessarily consider the opposition to be a withholding thing. It depended on the planets. So the 11th, that of hope, there's hope again, fortune, riches, fame, companions. The 11th house of trust and fortune and praise. Also, okay, so that was the abbreviation part. That's from Abu Mashar, right? So the 11th, that of hope, fortune, riches, fame, companions. And Al-Qabizi says trust and fortune and praise, friends, under officials, right? Because the 10th house would be the highest official. So the second house, the second from the 10th is the 11th, and the second from the first. So in a duel, originally, way back when, in a duel, you would have to bring someone who you called your second, and they would be a witness to the event. And they'd be a witness to the event. They would hold your gun. They would hold your stuff, etc. And so in astrology, that person is represented by the second house, not by the 11th house, your friend. You wouldn't bring the person may be your friend, but in this particular instance, he is acting as your second. Thus, an underofficial is acting as the king, which is the 10th house, the king's second. So that's why it's underofficials. Recompense, clothing, sense, dignity, affection, and joy. Now, clothing and sense are also connected to the 5th house. So that's interesting. Dignity, affection, and joy. And so is affection and joy connected to the 5th. Signifies the end of the middle of the years of life and after the middle life. It's a succeeding house, so that makes sense. And here's this interesting thing that we've started looking at, which is looking at the planets who rule the triplicity of the element. So the triplicity is another word for element. So the planets who rule the element of the sign that's on the cusp of the 11th. And so, for instance, if let's say Aquarius is on the cusp of the 11th, then the 3 planets that are the triplicity rulers of air, right? Aquarius is an air sign, are Saturn, Mercury, and Jupiter. And that changes, that order changes if it's a nighttime chart because Mercury is the ruler by night. So if it's a daytime ruler, then Saturn would be the first lord of the triplicity. If it's a daytime chart, and he would represent trust. If it's a nighttime chart, then Mercury would be the first lord of the triplicity of the house of trust, and he would signify trust. Consequently, the second triplicity ruler in a daytime chart would be Mercury, who would represent friends. The second triplicity ruler in a nighttime chart would be Saturn, who would represent friends. And then Jupiter would represent their usefulness. So that's something you can do. So in the list or the litany of things that we look at, all right, so we've come up with like a checklist of things that we look at to come to a decision, because it becomes kind of a like, what the fuck? So we look at, obviously, the house. We look at the planet that rules the house. We look at the planets in the house, right? Then we also look at any parts, any lots, Arabic parts or Egyptian lots connected to the house. Then we can also look at the compound almutin for the house, right? We've done that, where we look at all the different points, and then we find one planet that has the highest amount of points in that, of all those places. Then and then also we can look at the triplicity rulers as well, but we look at all of them in order to come to a judgment. And so I remember when I first came around this like 25 years ago or whatever, came and was looking at it, and I thought, oh, this doesn't really work. And what I didn't understand was that it was part of the pile on of significations that we look for. Oh, the other thing that we also look at is the planet that naturally is the significator for the house. So for instance, the natural significator for the second house is Jupiter, right? Because that's wealth. The natural significator for the third house is Mars, because he represents brothers, right? The natural significator for the fourth house is the sun by day and Saturn by night, right? The natural significator for the fifth house is Venus. Natural significator for the sixth house is Mars and Mercury, because Mercury represents servants, and the sixth house is the house of servants. Natural significator for the seventh is the moon, because remember, originally men were the people that were getting their astrology charts read, and the moon represented women and thus the wife, right? So, and continuing, like significator for eighth house is death, because Saturn because of death. The ninth house is Jupiter because of wisdom, but also the sun because the sun is in its joy there. The 10th house, the sun, but also Mars because of action. The 11th house, Jupiter, right? And then also Venus because of friendships. And then the 12th house, Saturn. All right, so we would look at all of those things when we look at these things. We look at the house, the ruler, the planet in the house, the lots connected to the house, the natural significator for the house, the triplicity rulers of the house, etc. Those are all the things we look at. Oh, and the almutin, the compound almutin. Okay, 11th house is the house of fortune, trust, and hope. Look, we're getting very good at, especially now that we're in the 13th century. Things are nice and strong, and what's the word I'm looking for? And consistent. And Saul said that it succeeds to the angle of the midheaven, right, which I was talking about, and it signifies the substance of the king, right, because it's the second from the 10th, right? The second from the 10th, the second house is also always substance, right? So it's the king's money, and his renderings are tributes, and his soldiers and footmen, right? Because his retinue, his host, all of that stuff is second from the 10th, or allies. And the man who succeeds the king, right? Because it's the succeedant from the 10th, or the first prince after him. And it signifies praises and children. And Al-Kabizi said, oh, right, because the 11th house is a house of children, is also a house of children. Definitely. That's something that I learned when I was reading Valens. We think primarily of the fifth house as the house of children. But if you remember, I think, Diana, you might even been with us when we did the fifth house and fertility, and we saw that we were looking for planets that said yes to children in the 1st, 7th, 10th, and 11th, and possibly 5th. And there was a list of planets that said yes, and a list of planets that said no to that as well. And so I thought that was so much more of a meaty kind of technique. And Bonatti, and of course, Bonatti always quotes Alcabisi, and so Bonatti has quoted him again here. Okay, so here's Scherner, who's from the 16th century, and you can see that he changed the co-significator for it into the sun. 11th house, which is called the good demon or good genius, so we still have that going. It is dedicated to friends, counselors, and political supporters, hope and flavors. It signifies from the lower leg to the ankles and co-significator, right? Because as we know, the houses and the signs share the same body parts. That's one of the only in Western astrology, that in my opinion is one of the only things that we use the connection between the signs and the houses. So Aquarius rules the same part of the body as the 11th house. Now he puts the sun as co-significator. Now notice that he put Mars as the co-significator for the 10th house, right? But he put the sun as co-significator, and that's because it's, the 11th house can raise you really high. By the time you get to the 10th house, you're already there, and can you hold on to it, right? So the whole thing with the Wheel of Fortune Tarot is, if you're at the top, you have to do lots and lots and lots to stay there, because when you're at the top, there's only one way to go, and that's down. And finally, we go to Lily in the 11th, and he doth naturally represent friends and friendships, hope, trust, confidence. So hope and trust, hope and trust. So now I think we can think, if a person says, like, on Reddit all the time, people say, I have problems trusting. I have problems with trust. Now we know that trust belongs to the 11th house, right? So let's say we've got a ruler of the 11th house in a really bad condition. That person will probably have difficulty making their wishes come true. They will also probably have difficulty with friendships, and they will also have maybe problems trusting people, and also problems trusting themselves and having confidence in themselves, right? Because you have to have that in order to kind of go for your dreams, right? In order to kind of live your dreams, or to, to take up that big risk and open your own business and leave that job that was paying you so well, that's the 11th house. That's the 11th house risk. The praise or dispraise of anyone, the fidelity or falseness of friends, right? So that's interesting, because we tend to think of false friends as belonging to the 12th. But we could also see from the condition of the ruler of the 11th house and planets in the 11th house, what the conditions of friends might be, right? As to kings, it personates their favorites. So once again, this issue with the second, the undersecretary, the under prince, or the first prince to the king, or their favorite consigliere, counselors, there we go, servants, their associates or allies, their money, exchequer or treasure, right? Because it's the second house of money, so the king's money. In war, their ammunition or soldiery, so it's all their substance, right? So it's what's in the coffers. Represents courtiers in a commonwealth governed by a few of nobles and commons. It personates so our Senate. So in the United States, our Senate would be an 11th house thing. It personates their resistance in council. As in London, the 10th house represents the Lord Major, so the president would be our 10th house. The 11th would represent our Congress, the Common Council. The ascendant, the generality of commoners of the said place. So the ascendant would be the population. The 11th house would be the Congress, and the 10th house would be the president. Of members, it rules the legs to the ankles, which makes perfect sense. Of colors, it rules the saffron or yellow. So I don't know if you were with me when we talked about colors. So I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it later. Remind me to come back to it, and I may come back to it actually after we turn off the recording. Jupiter does especially rejoice in this house, right? It says joy. It's a succeeding house in masculine, and in virtue is equivalent either to the 7th or 4th houses. So that's important. In virtue is equivalent either to the 7th or 4th houses. The astrologers of the medieval to the early Baroque period, with Lily is early Baroque. So the astrologers of that period, especially from like maybe the 8th century to the 17th century, they were really into this idea of rating or ranking the houses by strength. And so this, of course, will be here on the thing, but you should write it down. And of course, you're going to come to it, because when you're going to come to it if you're looking at if you're working with the traditional astrology course, then I talk about this quite a bit. But the ascendant was considered the strongest house of the entire chart, and the angles, of course, were the strongest, then the succeeding, then the cadent. And the angles, of course, are 1, 4, 7, 10. The succeeding are 2, 5, 8, 11. The cadent are 3, 6, 9, 12. But 1, 10, 7, 4 were considered the rank of the angles. So 1 was considered the strongest, then 10, then 7, then 4. And then the next one after that was the 11th. And so, as you can see, and in virtue is equivalent to either the 7th or the 4th houses. In some of these lists, the 11th is before the 7th house. So that shows you how benefic they believe this actual house to be. Okay, so that's all the presentation part of the share. I have more to share. It's just that's all the presentation part of the share I'm going to do. All right, let me come to what I thought I would look at is some of the parts that are connected to the 11th house. And so you can get a really good idea of what the house represents by looking at the title of the parts that are connected to it. So does everybody here, Shanice, do I need to explain the Arabic parts or Egyptian lots to you at all? What a part is, what we look at all, or are you pretty much cool with that? Because I'm happy to do a little explanation if necessary. Okay, perfect. So I'm sure you probably know about the lot of fortune. You know about the lot of spirit. Okay, excellent. So there are close to 100, and maybe more, and they all represent different things. And so the lot of fortune and the lot of spirit are one of 7 lots that are connected to the 7 planets. I don't know if you all knew that, but the lot of fortune is called the ascendant of the moon. And so it's considered the moon's lot. And then the lot of spirit is considered the sun's lot. So that's the first distinction, is that there are 7 lots that are just connected specifically to the 7 planets. And those 2 lots are the first 2 of them. And they also are considered to be the preeminent lots of all. So the lot of fortune and lot of spirit are considered to have more power and more relevance than any of the others. However, each house also has lots connected to it. And as I mentioned, you can get a strong understanding of what the house means based on what the title of the lots are. And so the first lot of the 11th is called the lot of excellence and nobility. Right? We saw stuff like that in the 10th house. But already that shows us that there's something, excuse me, lifting us into the ranks of nobility with the 11th house. And so that one's taken from the part of fortune to the part of spirit by day, and vice versa by night. So when we look at some of these charts, we may look at a few of these. Actually, there's one especially that I want to look for, and that, Diana, you might want to look at in your own chart. Now, okay, so the second one is how a person is loved by men or how they hate him. Okay, that makes sense with the 11th house as friends, right? Or how well they get along with friends. Here's another one, the third, of the native among men, and of an honored man among them, and by which of them a business or activities are perfected. So a lot of that already, as we can see, now in the modern era, we tend to call 3, 7, and 11, houses 3, 7, and 11, the air houses, right? But I call 3, 7, and 11 the social houses, because they are highly social, and the air houses mean social, so it really probably doesn't matter very much. But that's the aspect of, notice how social the implications of the 11th house are. So the first one was how high and how noble the person will get. The second one is how well he's loved by other people. The third one is how well he's accepted as one of us by other people, right? And that would be useful for someone like myself who's living in a foreign country, right? As a matter of fact, when I was in India, I met this man on a train. He came up to me and started talking to me in this language called Kannada, which is the language of Karnataka. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, English, etc. And so we started talking, etc. And I said, at some point he was like, oh, well, you should think about coming and living here. And I said, oh, I don't know if I could live here in India. He goes, oh, you could totally live here. You don't feel like a foreigner. That's part of this 11th house native among men thing. Right, so here's an aspect of, once again, the social aspect of the 11th. This is the one that I thought you might want to look at, Diana. The fourth part of the 11th house is called the part of felicity and profit. Felicitatis et profectus. And it's taken by the part of fortune to Jupiter by day and by night the opposite direction. Okay? And so with all of these, Benatti, now mind you, Benatti got this from Al-Kabizi and Abu Mashar. Right, so almost all of these are in there, are in the same one. You know what? I'm gonna share them with you. I'm gonna share. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna share both the Deborah Holding and this one with you both, with all of you in the chat. So once I stop sharing, then I'll share both of those with you. I have them, and I've got also the Al-Kabizi too, and I can share that with you all as well. And I've got a bunch of little things, and so I'm happy to share. I've also got that Benatti 146 considerations that I did a bunch of those videos on too, and I can give you those as well. Good, everyone's happy, yay! All right, 11th house, right? 11th. Well, it's more 5th house, like 5th house gifts. But it's 11th house, getting my wish so I can learn more astrology, or getting my wish I get the books that I need, you know, so, right. All right, so we just talked about 4th house, felicitatis et profectus, or felicity and profit. 5th house, part of concupiscence and zeal or appetite for love of secular and temporal things, right? So that's not a spiritual person, but that's a person that puts all of their striving and hungering after the world and its pleasure. Okay, so that's I think that's a very interesting aspect, and also shows the connection of Venus to the 11th house. 6th part is called the part of faith and hope. So that would be maybe another important one for you, Diana, and not just Diana, but I mean, since Diana has made it clear that she has planets in the 11th, she's got stuff going on with the 11th. She's got 11th house karma that she's dealing with. And so it'd be interesting to see where these parts are for her. The 6th part of the 11th house is called the part of faith and hope. And see, and since we've been looking so much at this idea of faith and hope, that's been coming up over and over again when we've been looking at the meanings. So Saturn to Venus by day, and Saturn to Venus, and night the opposite. And note that that's the part of marriage for women. South Node in the 11th, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit different. We talked a little bit about the South Node last week, didn't I? Talk about K2 last week, and about the disillusionment that K2 brings because it doesn't want to create new karma. So that can do that in the 11th house. So the 11th house is friends, so it can do it with friends, and it can do it with dreams and hopes. Yeah, watch wherever K2 is, there's going to be disillusionment. K2, wherever K2 is, we don't want to create new karma. That K2 is the moksha, is moksha karaka. Moksha is where we break the bondage to the we break the bondage from the cycle of rebirth and death. All right, and so K2 wants that. So in order to do that, we can't be creating any more karma. And so that area of life where he is, he will make it untenable. He will make it so that you don't enjoy it, so that you won't create new karma there. So okay, so part of faith. 7th is part of friends. So here we come to the part of friends itself. Day and night, moon to Mercury. Okay, so part of friends. And isn't that interesting? The moon and Mercury are both considered the two aspects of the mind, the rational and non-rational mind. So that's the moon and Mercury are the two main indicators for the soul as well, right? As a result of becoming the non-rational and rational mind. Eighth part is agreement of friends and of husbands and wives and their discord or concordia amicorum. So that's taken from a part of spirit to Mercury. Like I said, I'm going to give you all of this stuff. We're just going through this right now. And then the ninth is called the part of fertility and abundance of good in the home. So do you see, it's all about how good things can get and how good things can get in a social thing, in a social environment that's different specifically from, this isn't saying how good a marriage can be. We would be looking at the seventh house for the parts that tell us how good the marriage is going to be. Specifically, right? That other one did mention marriage, but really it's about how well we get along. What's the vibe like in my home, right? That's this one. Part of fertility and abundance of the good in the home, right? So what's the vibe like in my home? Is it a place of joy and abundance and happiness and fun and music and good food? Is it a place that's dour? Is it a place where, you know, that's repressive? You know, right? So every home is different, right? 10th part of the 11th is called the part of the goodness of the soul. So even now we come into how good, coming back to how good the person is and whether or not people will pick up the goodness of them and like them. And that's Mercury to Sun by day and night, the reverse. And the 11th part of the 11th is called the part of praise and gratitude. So you see, so laudis is not just praise, but it's it's like applause, right? Applaud. L-A-U-D is the last part of the word applaud, right? So same thing. So it's like it's to be more than just praised, but to be applauded. So the 11th house brings that as well. And then part of necessity and of the selection of things. So there's this real strong aspect of practical attainment with the 11th. I'm getting it specifically, once again, so you see what I mean by when we go through all these parts, all of a sudden there's a bunch of new implications. The 11th house is a highly social house. The 11th house is a house of many different types of achievement. There's the type of achievement, there's many types of wealth. You can be rich in good friendship. You can be rich in goodwill. You can be rich in money. You can be rich in high position. You see what I'm saying? So it's all about kind of exploring, because remember the 11th house is the house of gain. That's a word we haven't really used or seen yet, but that's especially, it's a Ghana house. Ghana is the Sanskrit word. It's a Ghana, the 11th is a Ghana house, and it's the house of Bhagya. So it's your house of splendor and a house of splendor. So it's where, you know, so there's wealth and there's splendor. And so the 11th house is supposed to bring the splendor. And I think that's just the last one, the 12. Yeah, that's the last one. So what I thought I would do next, what I thought I would do next is I would like for Diana, you know, since you made a comment kind of about this situation, I was wondering if you'd like to talk a little bit about, kind of the 11th house, you know, how this kind of rang a bell for you, 11th house wise, and what we're saying fits in to whatever extent you're comfortable.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So hopes and dreams at a very young age, I was very unusual when it came to that in comparison to others my age. My dreams were always considerably like far reaching and compared to, you know, my peers. So for instance, graduating from high school or college, I was always shooting for the stars and always wanted, I always had very big hopes and dreams. And I put so much effort into making them come to fruition that I do think that a lot of my 11th house activity has to do with that. The promotion by recommendation of friends is so applicable to my story as well. It's something that I'm actually going through right now, specifically at work. I'm applying to a new job, and then all of a sudden my company had a hiring freeze, and I'm up against hundreds of other people. And my company is a rather large company. So it's about 80,000 people that work at my company. And coincidentally, just because there's a leader within my company that's just a friend of mine, you know, that I met through work, I'm not only, they've lifted the hiring freeze for this role, but also considering giving me a promotion. Like, it's so applicable to this present moment in time as well. And then when you shared, for instance, the example of like the native men, right? When you shared when you were in India, how when you were conversing with the gentleman, how he felt like you were personality wise, you fit there, right? You're like a native. That resonated as well with me because I've spent a lot of my life traveling as well, and have been to numerous countries and have very much heard the same thing over and over in many places, because apparently like there's a personality to you. It's almost like I'm a chameleon.
Chameleon, I'm the same way, exactly.
Yeah, and you just fit so well with wherever you go, and people feel like you're from there. I mean, I can go on and on about just so much of what we just read through resonates with my entire life story.
All right. And so can you also then, of course you're going to say yes, you can also see then how modern astrology has truncated it. And you might not have felt when you first got into astrology what your connection with the 11th house was.
Exactly. That is very true. Because I also think that while it's part of your, how you are, you don't see those things right off the bat. A lot of these, the descriptions of the 11th house play out through your life, and you need to go through those experiences to actually see it. Very
good. Excellent point. Wonderful point. No, but however, now tell me, is your chart ruler in the 11th?
Well, if you look at if we're looking at Placidus, it is actually both Placidus and whole sign. It is, yes, because I'm a Gemini ascendant and my Mercury's in my 11th house.
Okay, fantastic. So that means then that so notice how she had said that she was different from others in that she was immediately oriented towards the realization of dreams. She had big ones, she had specific ones, she had the will towards it. Those of you who have watched or who remember when we looked at the ascendant and personal happiness, it's a form of local determination, right? It's a form of determining what the person, it's called primary motivation. That's for you, Shanice. So primary motivation is basically wherever you find the ruler of the ascendant by sign and by house, that shows you where the person is kind of naturally oriented and what brings them happiness. And so with you, 11th house karma would be that thing, the 11th, pursuing 11th house issues. Like you said, everybody else was playing dolls, and I was thinking about when I was going to have my first $1 billion company or whatever, however that worked.
That's exactly right. It was like my eye was on the United Nations when everyone else was playing dolls. That's really how it was.
Got it. Right. Exactly. So you had a specific vision. And so 11th house is the vision. The 11th house is the vision that we have. So I want to thank you so much for sharing that, because this is so important, in my opinion. This is such an important thing that that modern astrology has dropped the ball on. And as a result, we don't, and as I said, there's so many other implications. Like I mentioned, Cornelius Agrippa gave us the ability to name the good spirit. And there are ways in which, for instance, we can see from a chart whether they need help with being able to get what they want or not, whether they have the support. And so I'm going to segue to that from here. And everybody who's still here, I think is just maybe Tina and Shanice. Feel free to, if you have a question, feel free to speak it. If you're still just comfortable doing chat, that's no problem too. But but don't feel like you need to wait until a specific time. Just coming out with whatever questions you may have. And even if that's about clarifying terminology or whatever, that's what we're here to do for right now. Okay, so I want to come down here. This was a Reddit thing. This was a Reddit post. She wrote, "My life dream is to have 5 kids by age 45, but I've had PCOS for 13 years, and October 28th CT scan found a multiseptated hypodense lesion in my midline pelvis measuring blah, blah, blah. It's likely originating from my right ovary. Does my natal chart show infertility, or will I be okay?" Now, this isn't a horary chart. This is a natal chart that we're going to look at. She asked if it's going to be okay, which of course is kind of a horary question, but she really wants to know, what is the determination of my fertility in the natal? And what I want to bring your attention to is the first sentence. My life dream is to have 5 kids by age 45. That's her life dream, but she's had this thing for 13 years. So let's look at this chart. So it's a Placidus chart, like I said, I'll read whatever's in front of me generally. And note that Venus and Mars are conjunct in the first house, right? Cancer is rising. And what's as far as when we're thinking about children, can anybody remember what's important about a sign like Cancer? Cancer is a fertile sign. So that's already a sign of fertility, right? This chart is kind of about fertility, right? And so already that's very good. And so already that's kind of a clue into this chart. But the biggest clue is the fact that Libra is on the cusp of the 5th house. And the 5th house is the house of children and fertility. And note that Venus is right there within 6 degrees of the cusp of the 1st house. So remembering that the 1st house is also the head and the mind, we've got the 5th house on the mind. We've got Venus on the mind. And we've got Venus in a fertile sign on the mind. So we've got this idea of fertility. We've got this idea of fertility on the head. Then Venus is conjunct. Mars and Venus rule 5th because that's right. Mars and Venus both rule the 5th. And Mars is ruling Scorpio, which is also a fertile sign. Mars is in fall in this particular chart, right? Mars is in Cancer, which is the sign of his fall, but he is also the ruler of the 5th. Absolutely fantastic observation. But more germane to our conversation, Mars is the ruler of the 11th. Right, because Libra is on the cusp of the 5th, right? The Mars and Venus signs oppose each other. Aries is on the cusp of the 11th, which brings the Venus and the Mars together. What did she say? My life dream is to have 5 kids. My life dream is to be extremely fertile. And there we have it. They're in the 11th. The ruler of the 11th is with the ruler of the 5th. They're both in very fertile Cancer. Right, so that's the dream. There's the life dream right there, right? Super prominent. In a similar way. Now, in Diana's chart, we had the ruler of the 1st and the 11th. In this chart, we've got the ruler of the 11th and the 1st. They will operate in similar ways. What you'll have generally is that when the ruler of the 1st is in the 11th, the person will go for it more aggressively and assertively. When the ruler of the 11th is in the 1st, it'll be on their mind all the time, right? Because the 1st is the head. So, can this person make this dream come true? Note that of the planets that are angular, there are only 3 planets that are angular in this chart based on the cuspal system, and that they are Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. Note that Jupiter is the ruler of the 6th house of illness. Note also that the moon is at 24 degrees of Sagittarius in the 6th house applying to Jupiter, who is the ruler of the 6th house of illness. Is Saturn the deciding factor because of its presence in the 11th? No, actually, I'm getting to it now. I'm getting to it now. There's a bunch of deciding factors. The first deciding factor is the fact that Mars is in fall. Now, Mars is helped by the fact that Venus is there, a benefic, and that Jupiter is retrograding towards him, right? So Jupiter is in his own sign. And also Jupiter is the exaltation ruler of Cancer. The problem, though, is that Jupiter rules both the 6th and the 10th in this chart, meaning he should be ruler of 6th and 9th, right? He shouldn't even have the 10th, meaning that he might bring the career and the reputation, but he can also bring the illness. He can also bring the illness. That means that he's part ruler of the 1st house. So the ruler of the 6th now is part ruler of the 1st house. The ruler of the 1st house is also in the 6th. So Mars, the ruler of the 11th, is in a sign ruled by the ruler of the 1st in the 6th. Can this person make this dream happen? It doesn't look like it. Now, the excellent, fantastic question that Shanice brought up was, is the deciding factor the Saturn? And I don't think that I think that the Saturn, I would have been more inclined to say yes if the Saturn were at like 29 degrees of Aries. I mean, it's not good having him there, right? I mean, and if anything, it's a sign that things are fucked up. And it's a sign that things are fucked. And also Taurus is the natural 11th, isn't it? Which means now that Venus is the ruler of the natural 11th and Mars is the ruler of the natural 5th. If we look at it from a whole sign standpoint, which means that now the ruler of the 5th is in fall. And it's being supported by the Venus who's in the 11th, who's got this huge wish and dream, right? So we've got it either way. If we look at the whole sign chart, then all of a sudden things suddenly just kind of change. So my point, the reason I was using this was two things. First of all, that we could see an example, a chart that embodies a person who has a lifelong wish or dream. We can see from both planets who would be ruler of the 11th, both Mars and Venus, they are both in a fertile sign, the fertile sign of Cancer, right? And we also know that they are going to be with the planet that's the ruler of the 5th, whether it's from the whole sign standpoint or this Placidus standpoint, right? And so we know that then the nature of what that person's lifelong dream or the wish that they want to fulfill is around fertility and children. Can it happen? The person has been getting pregnant, right? So there's these false alarms. The Jupiter is giving the false alarm, but also remember the Jupiter is giving the problem. The Jupiter is bringing the problem. Who's the ruler of the 8th? Saturn is the ruler of the 8th and the 11th, right? So Saturn gives, the 8th house can give the chronic diseases as well, right? Or it can also create trauma, right? The 8th house is the house of fear and trauma, right? So it can also create trauma and unhappiness, right? So, and also Saturn says no, and Saturn is the obstacle. Saturn is the mountain that must be the mountain that must be climbed in order to get to where you say you want to get, and it may not be there when you get there. So what do we think? Can this person get pregnant? Will this person get what they want? Sadly, no. Yeah, I agree. I think what I told her was one was possible. I think I might have written, let's see, the role of Saturn, the part of children. In my opinion, the question is one less one of fertility than one of being healthy enough to viably carry a child. And so, yes, to viably carry a child, this chart points to general and continuous health issues, which I feel must be resolved before thinking of having children. I do think a child is possible, a child, but there is a strong will, for fertility and children in this chart. If the health of the body can match the will, maybe you can have your wish. And so that was my feeling about that. I didn't really think so, that I thought that the health issues, and see, once again, note that both Venus and Mars are going to the trine of this Jupiter, the ruler of the sixth, right? Who's been rendered. So when you see planets that are angular, so you thought, how did it throw you off, Dinah? You thought, oh, that should be a good thing, that should be a helping thing, the Jupiter?
Yeah, that's why initially I thought it was quite possible, but I didn't recognize that the ruler of the sixth house was Jupiter, and that the square with Moon takes place there, like all the components of the building block after the good news kind of it came tumbling down. So
yeah, exactly. And that's why, so like, for instance, when you Shanice, for instance, when you were asking about the deciding factor, I don't really use, I mean, every now and then I do. I think you were there when I was looking at that chart of Kendrick Lamar or whatever, and I saw the Mercury Mars, and that was a deciding factor. Every now and then there are deciding factors. But as far as I'm in this chart made it really clear that there were health problems, right? So this chart made it really clear that I've got this really, really strong wish, and it's preoccupying my mind. It's obsessing my mind. But then at the same time, I've got this physical problem that I have to deal with, right? The Moon's next application is to Jupiter. So are Venus and Mars. All of that shit's going to Jupiter, and he's retrograde. So when we finally kind of gotten a grasp on retrogradation, what we realize is that it's unpredictable. It's unreliable, and it will go backwards towards something that is not useful instead of forwards to something that will. So even with that, with the Jupiter that's in Pisces, that should be well behaved, the retrogradation can make it be just a little bit wayward. I learned from your chart examples that Jupiter and Venus are not always good things, that to bring significations from the houses the planets rule into the planet houses they are in. Absolutely. I was actually just going to mention it for your own, for you specifically, is that any planet can become functionally benefic or malefic. You have to look at the houses that are ruled. And also, I mean, very few people really watch the 146 considerations stuff that I did, but one of the best things about that, and I didn't really go that deeply into it, but we spent maybe 2 weeks on just the fourth consideration, which was how to know if something is going to take place or not. Then we spent like another 2 weeks on how to know if a planet is impeded or not, right? Or if a planet is in good condition. What shows you that? Like, I feel like I got the strongest foundation in knowing, really recognizing when a planet is in good condition, is whether it's being benefited or whether it's being impeded. And in this particular case with this Jupiter, the retrogradation is an impediment of sorts, despite the essential dignity and the fact that it rules the sixth. Not just that it rules the sixth, but that its diurnal sign, its diurnal masculine sign, is on the cusp of the sixth. Jupiter is a diurnal masculine planet. So wherever his diurnal masculine expression is, he's going to give it just that little bit more juice. So that's something to think about as well. Make sure you know what planets are. Like Saturn is diurnal and masculine, which means Aquarius is the sign of his joy. Jupiter, so there are houses that are joys, And then there are signs that are joys, and that all has to do with the sign that is of the same sect and gender as the planet. So, as I mentioned, Jupiter's is Sagittarius. That's his joy. Saturn's joy is Aquarius. Venus's is Taurus, right? Because Taurus is nocturnal and female. Mars is Scorpio because he's nocturnal. The sun, of course, is Leo. The moon's was Cancer. And then what Mercury's was Virgo because he's the ruler of earthly things. And then did I miss anybody else? Oh, wait, is the moon pushing nature? Good question. She is indeed pushing nature. Excellent. Fantastic question. Shanice knows some stuff. Go, girl. Yeah, fantastic work. So you're not that, you know what's going on. All right, you know the term pushing nature, then you must have gotten pretty far in the course because we've been talking about that. Good work. Yeah, stupendous. Yes, it is indeed pushing nature. Which but okay, guess what? So one of the things about reception, I'm actually, oh, by the way, I'm going to be doing, you're a wonderful student, fantastic. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm doing a thing on Clubhouse on Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time on aspects and reception. It's called The Key to Aspects, and it's with Dennis Sumlin and Seven Durant. So Shanice knows those names. And so Dennis and Seven and I are doing a Clubhouse thing on aspects, and I'm specifically going to talk about reception. And so one of the things that I'm talking about with reception is the fact that reception removes evil, but that's not the case in this chart. What this chart does is it confirms evil. Look at it. The moon is in the sixth of illness. It's applying to the ruler of sixth of illness, and it's giving the sign of it's giving the sixth to the ruler. Right. So remember, the moon is the most important planet in the chart, next to the ascendant ruler. It's maybe even more so. And whoever the moon is working for, rather, when you're looking at the moon, you need to be thinking of it as, who is the moon working for? And the moon is really working for Jupiter. Right, the moon, and remember, the moon, as I always say, is what's alive within us, but she sets the tone for the entire chart. That's also, so when we get to the moon, when we actually, as of last week, I finished all of the planets except for the moon. I did Saturn last week, but I started with the moon in my very, very first one, and that whole thing was about, does having a fucked up moon in a natal chart affect everything else? Like, because in a horary chart it does. You have a fucked up moon in a horary chart, then the question is pretty much fucked. If it's are we going to get married, and the moon's in Scorpio, and it's opposing Mars or something like that, there's going to be a fight on the horizon. I mean, things aren't going to happen. The moon is Fortuna. The moon is the roll of the dice. And of course, since we also know that the moon is mind, we can infer that in a natal chart, if the mind isn't strong and stable, then almost nothing can really happen, right? I mean, that's just kind of on the most basic standpoint, but it's kind of like the moon represents kind of the quotient of power that the chart has to make anything happen. And like, for instance, I've got a void of course moon in my chart. And so it's very difficult for me I'm excellent at starting things, but it's easy for me to kind of fall off the pier and just lose interest. And so I can see how that manifests in me and affects how I do other things. And so it's another thing that I was looking at when I created the initial study, was how much is the moon really affecting everything in the natal chart? Everything, right? And will it affect? And like I said, if you've got Moon Saturn conjunction, let's say you got Moon Saturn conjunction in Capricorn or in Aquarius or something like that, and which means that you're kind of, you are inclined towards profundity and depth, but also depression, right? And over intellectualization, possibly. That could get in the way of being able to make choices, being able to make a career choice, being able to go for something when I need it, being able to talk to that cute guy, being able to enjoy myself at a party. You see what I'm saying? All of a sudden, the composition of the moon, or the that's a different word, complex composition, something like that. But the composition of the moon is the profile. That's the term I'm using. The profile of the moon ends up affecting bleeding into everything else, right? The moon is the strongest magnetic force in the chart. So she's pulling everything towards that. So when you look at the moons in your own charts, be thinking of that polar, that magnetic polar aspect. You know, she rules all the water in the chart. That means she's going to be connected to Venus, because Venus is Jalatatva. Venus is a water planet. Right? So all of a sudden, then we know that how we are with moon affects how we are with Venus, which is love and relationships and joining and sex and all of that stuff, which makes perfect sense, right? Because our mind and our emotions affect all of that. So that's a really, really long form answer to your question. Yes, a long form yes to your question. But mostly because in this particular chart, the moon pushing nature at Jupiter is unfortunate. It's unfortunate. It's malefic. It's by square. It's not just because it's by square. It's because, remember, the Jupiter signs square each other. It's because she's compounding the illness. She's compounding the fact that illness is what this chart's about in a lot of ways. And she's a mean little bitch, because she's the chart ruler. So it's the physical body itself. It's the person. It's the person, the physical body. There's no escape from it. So this is a place where reception it's not a negative reception. This should be a really strong, this should be a really, really positive reception, but it's not. It's a really strong reception for illness. It makes her so susceptible to the illness, to, you know, consistently, right? She had 13 years, and it hasn't been chronic. She mentioned that it wasn't chronic, that it came and went. It was something that appeared and disappeared. Pisces, the diseases like that, the mutable signs, and especially Pisces, they come and go. They show up, they disappear, and that's what she's been dealing with for the past 13 years. And it's been affecting her fertility. Let's see where the part of fertility or the part of children is, and then let's see where the part of one of the 11th house parts is. So the part of children is Jupiter to Saturn by day, and the opposite by night. So we've got Saturn to Jupiter. It's a nighttime chart. Sun is down here. So Saturn to Jupiter is back 30 and another 6. So back 30, another 6. That's 6 degrees or 7 degrees of Gemini. Now, what do we know about the sign Gemini as far as fertility is concerned? It's sterile. The sterile signs are Gemini, Leo, and Virgo. Where's Mercury? Mercury is retrograde in Leo. So that's not a good sign, right? That's not a good sign already. And notice that the 12th house, that the part of children is in the 12th. And so if the 11th house is the house of hopes and dreams for future, then the 12th house is what I call the house of pipe dreams. Right? That's where, I'm gonna, once I stop drinking, I'm gonna make that money, I'm gonna have that house, and I'm gonna get Alice back. I mean, I'll get her back. I mean, it's just because I was a drunk. I'll get, that's that pipe dream thing, right? So is there a pipe dream aspect possibly going on in this chart? Going on with this chart? Look at how the moon is not only applying to the Jupiter by square, but also applying to the Mercury. And actually, the next aspect is to the Mercury. The next aspect is to the 2730 versus 2735, 5 minutes earlier. So the moon will trine the ruler of the 12th first, right? The 12th is our self-undoing. The 12th is the pipe dream. Okay, so let's look at one of these 11th house ones and see which one. So it looks like it would be, oh, here's this one, the part of fertility and abundance of good in the home. So should we look at that one? Or should we look at the part of perfectus, the other one, the part of felicity and profit? I guess it looks like more like it should be fertility and goodness in the home. Do you all agree? Fertility and abundance of good in the home. Let's look at that one. Moon to Mercury, day or night. Moon to Mercury. Oh, that's that back. So back 120 forward 3. Back 120 forward 3 brings us to 15 degrees of Pisces, or 16 degrees of Pisces on that Jupiter. So there can be an abundance of good, but there's also an abundance of what? There's an abundance of illness. So it looks like there's probably a mixed bag. There might be high attainment in this chart, right? There might be a high level of attainment in this chart as far as a career is concerned. There could be a lot of happiness in the home, but then there's also, but it's smeared by this Jupiter. It's smeared, like the Jupiter is going to give two different types of effects, and it's going to be unpredictable. Whatever it gives, it's going to do it in an unpredictable manner, both because of the Pisces and because of the retrogradation. I had not expected to spend quite as much time on this chart as we have, but it really is a fantastic example. I used this chart actually when I did a presentation on Clubhouse for a Jyotish group on Western astrology, and this was the chart that I used because it was so descriptive. I thought I've got a few interesting ways to look at charts. This is a horary chart. And the horary chart is, will my book be a success? So that says to us already that there is when we think of success, obviously we think of the 10th house. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe we should be thinking of the 11th house when we think of something succeeding, right? I mean, although the 10th house is rank, right? Getting to high rank, which of course is success. So I guess that makes sense. But 10th and 11th, I think, are both kind of connected. But this person has a dream for their life. They want to have a successful book, right? This person's dream is to have a successful book. Now, we could look at this in a bunch of different ways. The most thing that we would probably look at is, will my endeavor succeed? And that would be, the endeavor itself would be the 10th house. Right, so that's the business that I'm encroaching on, or that I'm starting, right? However, notice that Virgo is on the cusp of the 11th. This person wants a successful book. The exaltation of Mercury is on the 11th. It's a book that this person wants. It's something Mercury, right? Mercury is reading and writing and arithmetic, right? So it's obviously a book. So. But look at that. Look at where Mercury is. Mercury is in the 12th house of pipe dreams. Note that the moon is in the 11th. So because of this person is probably from relatively far north. Note that the moon, and of course in a horary chart, the moon is one of the most important planets. Matter of fact, the moon is the most important, and it tends to tell you whether or not it's one of the most important planets, and it tends to tell you, whether or not the thing's going to happen. It's usually the moon, especially, that we look to, and its applications that tell us whether or not the situation will come to be. So let's look at that, because the moon is here in the 11th with the part of fortune. You know, I'm a huge stickler for the part of fortune. Where is the Venus? The Venus is in Sagittarius in the 2nd. Okay, so that you're trying to, that's a form of success, is making money, is getting substance as a result. But the moon is doing what to where? To whom? The moon just left the trine of Saturn, it looks like. Saturn is the ruler of the 4th and the 3rd. 3rd house, of course, is the hands. And so that could have something to do. Maybe the person just finished the book, right? 4th house is the end of things. So maybe the person just finished. Jupiter's at the end. Jupiter's the 2nd house. So maybe there was some money that came out, or Jupiter's the 5th. So maybe there was a party. Maybe they just had like a finishing the book party. Opposite Chiron. Chiron is, where is Chiron? Oh, there. Oh, moon. Oh, definitely opposite Chiron. Oh, that is interesting, isn't it? And that's in the 5th of the things that give me pleasure, right? And so the Jupiter. So I think maybe there was a party. This person might have had a, hey, I've completed my book party, and they might have put quite a bit of money into it, not just the party, but the book. And now they're hoping that the book, they're finished with the book, and now they're hoping that it will happen. But what's the next thing the moon's going to do? The moon's at 9 degrees of Libra. She's not touching the sun. She's not doing anything until 22 degrees of Aquarius. So she's going to trine this Jupiter, who's the ruler of the 5th and also the ruler of the 2nd. So there looks like there could be some money that comes from it. But notice that there's no reception of any kind between these two. The moon's at Peregrine, the Jupiter is Peregrine. They're not really helping each other by being in trine. That's one of the things I'm going to be talking about when I talk about the reception. So this is a trine, but it's not mega trine or turbocharged trine, right? If the moon were in Cancer and Jupiter were in Pisces, that would be or vice versa. That would be a turbocharged reception trine. So not all aspects are created equal. Then the next thing it's going to do, so there might be a little money that comes. Then it goes to the conjunction of Mercury, which is not bad, but Mercury's in the 12th. And look, so is the ruler of the ascendant. It's in a good position, but in the 12th. Mercury's in the 12th, Moon's going to the 12th. So I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? I think it feels kind of pipe dreamy. It feels like maybe they even have a good book, right? Because Mars is in his own sign. He's in. Oh, the sun is fame, and the sun is the ruler of the 10th. So it could be. But I would be careful, right? Look at how the ruler of the 11th is in the 12th. The 12th is a debt. The 12th is something that the 12th doesn't see the light of day. The 12th is your secret enemy. So maybe that could be looking at, and Mars is there too, and Mars is enemies. Mars rules the 6th house. 6th house is connected to enemies. 7th house is connected to enemies. That's Venus. So this person, it could be that there's stiff competition, right? It doesn't have to be that there's necessarily enemies. It could also be that there is that there could be somebody working against them, working against their success. The sun's in the ascendant, but you know what? The Mars is combust. Okay. The Mars is combusted by the sun. The sun's moving away, but the Mars is combusted. And here's the thing. When we see combustion, we often tend to see an idealization, a not seeing things clearly, an overestimation. All the time, when I would see people say, "Oh, do you see me being famous for, as an actor or singer?" It was almost always Mercury, Moon. Sun, Mercury, or Sun, Venus. Almost always combusted planets. And so here we've got a combusted chart ruler in the horary. So there's an overestimation, which is why the Mercury is in the 12th. I think that more than likely the book might do just fine on some level, but I think that they may have overestimated overestimated its ability, or I mean, overestimation period, just overestimated maybe its appeal or whatever. But somehow there's an overestimation. So once again, looking at the 11th from this particular, now this is a place we're looking at the part of felicity and profit would make sense. So, and you can do these for horary. Won't be the success they desire, but successful nonetheless. I think respectable. I think something respectful. Okay, so part of fortune to Jupiter, or Jupiter to the part of fortune. Okay, so part of it's daytime, it's nighttime. So Jupiter to part of fortune. So it's 120 and back 13. 120 back, 120 back, another 13. So 27 Gemini. Oh, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And note that the Mercury just left the trine to Jupiter. I think you're right, Shanice. I think that there will be a relatively respectable, showing for this book. I think that there is an overestimation of its ability to sell, maybe, but ultimately that the person will. And look at how the ruler of the 11th is just left the ruler of the second. I mean, the ruler of the 11th. Yeah, the ruler of the second. Yeah, so I think that's a possibility. I'm gonna. I had another horary to look at, but what I thought I would do next would be to come to a chart of someone who was roundly hated. And so that means if you're roundly hated, that you are you don't really have very many friends. So looking at this from the concept of friends. And so this is the most hated woman in classical music. But because she was at the absolute top of her field, you would have to have sycophants, and there would be people. So there would probably be a kind of false friendship, or a people being kind of nice to their face thing. And look at how the Mars is with Neptune. The ruler of the 11th is with Neptune. So notice also how the ruler of the 11th is in detriment. So the ruler of the 11th is in detriment. The ruler of the 11th is with Neptune. So already we've got something going on with friendship. Excuse me. Now Mars is the opposite of harmony, even though Mars is in a Venus sign. Oh, thank you. I pride myself on choosing good charts. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's wonderful feedback. I appreciate it so much. I'm really into, when I'm dealing with a particular subject, I'm really into trying to find the charts that really kind of illustrate what we're talking about. So I really appreciate you making that comment. That makes me feel very good. I appreciate it so much. So Kathy Battle was an operatic soprano. She started in the 70s. She came to fame in the mid 80s, early mid 80s, and came to superstardom. She really became like one of the most important operatic superstars of the 80s and early 90s. At the same time, she was one of the most unpleasant, difficult, nasty, mean-spirited, horrible people. There's another famous soprano at that same time named Kiri Takanawa, and after they worked together in 1983, she refused to ever work with her again, and that's happened many times. So things came to a head in 1994 for Kathleen Battle when she was fired from the Met, and then subsequently also fired from the San Francisco Opera. I was living in San Francisco at the time, and the backstage crew had T-shirts made that said, what did they say? I survived the battle. This was in 1994, right when she got cut. So this woman made enemies. And this woman made enemies, very few real friends, almost no real friends of any kind, trusted almost no one, really just isolated themselves completely. Now, one of the things that I find so interesting about this chart is we were talking about, remember we were talking about Ted Bundy a while ago, and the Saturn in Leo, and one of the things that I had said for Saturn in Leo was misanthropy. That Saturn in Leo shows a person that doesn't really like people, can show a person that doesn't really value other people very much. Note that the chart ruler, note the extreme malefic influence on the chart ruler. Mercury's in Leo, so in a hot and dry sign, it's combust the sun in deep combustion 1 degree away, and the sun is in Leo. And then, so it's between extreme hot and extreme cold, right? And people did talk about Kathy Battle running hot and cold, but mostly they talked about the severity and the meanness, the anger, the meanness, the anger, the abusive anger, the meanness, the abusive speech, the abusive anger, which is why they, and the flying off the handle. Like, she would do things like tell people that they couldn't look at her while she sang. She was starting to have vocal issues, and the chin was starting to move. I come from the operatic background, so I'm into opera singers, and so the chin started to move, and so she was aware of it. So she made a rule that no one could watch her while she sang. This is the kind of nonsense that this bitch got away with because of the stature that she went to. So let's see if we can get a little deeper into some of these things. So noticing two things. Noticing that when we're looking at success, that we should be looking at the 10th and the 11th, right? When we're looking at hopes and dreams and wishes, we're looking at the 11th. When we're looking at friends and how people love them, we're looking at the 11th. When we're looking at how well they do in different circumstances and how well they are received by others, then we're looking at that. So this one gives it, and then here's the other thing about her, is that she would put on this sweet virginal, she would put on basically the same kind of act that she would put on as a singer with the audience. So that audience members, she was wonderful with the general public and with audience members. So all of these audience members had the best memories of backstage with Kathy Battle, whereas everybody that worked with her wanted to kill her. And note just one very interesting thing, because they talked about the fake sweetness. Jupiter rules the sweet, and the 7th house and the moon represent the general public. Jupiter represents the sweet taste. Remember, we were looking at that last week when we were looking at the different tastes of the planets. So let's now look at, we've got some good 11th house ones that we can look at. One of them is, remember, how much the person loves them, right? The second part of the 11th house is called the part signifying how the native Aquarian is loved by men or how they hate him. And so that's fortune to spirit by day. It's nighttime, so it's going to be spirit to fortune. So first, let's find the part of spirit. So it's daytime, so part of fortune is moon to sun. So part of spirit, it's nighttime, sorry. So part of fortune is moon to sun. So part of spirit is the opposite. It's sun to moon, so it's 120 minus 13. Forward 120 is Libra, minus 13 is 3 degrees of Libra or 4 degrees of Libra. So 4 degrees of Libra, and so we're going from 4 degrees of Libra to 29 degrees of Aquarius. So that's what we're doing, because it was fortune to spirit by day and spirit to fortune by night. So it's 120 plus 25. 120 plus 25 is 41. That's 11 Scorpio. So, bringing us back to, and look how it's on the K2, right? Are they loved by men? It's on the K2, and it brings us back to the Mars Neptune. I would have expected it. I would have expected it. Note that the Sun and the Mercury are separating from the Mars. Note that the Venus is widely applying to it. Note that the Mars is applying to the Jupiter. Also note that the Mars is on the part of spirit. right? And so the part of spirit had to specifically do with the person's mind and the person's personality, both fortune and spirit, but especially the person's personality in as they go into life, into their future life, and into their future career. So they tended to look at the part of spirit to represent kind of how far in life you will get and what, kind of the nature of what we can't yet see. It was called the part of absent things. So it's the stuff that we can't see that's coming. And that's why it was also called the part of future things, because it's what's coming that we can't see yet. And so what's coming that we can't see yet is this Mars Neptune on top of that on top of that spirit. And indeed, the career was Venus, was a Venusian, and look at how the Venus is on the cusp of the second. The second house is the voice, and the Venus, generally when you see Venus on the cusp of the second, you've got a singer and you've got an attractive voice, right? So you got those things. So we got that first one bringing us back to this Mars Neptune. Or really to this Mars Jupiter. Now, does Jupiter rule any of the malefic planets? Well, note that Jupiter rules the seventh, which is what? The seventh is the house of open enemies. Don't forget that. The seventh is the house of open enemies. So we've got a strong seventh house ruler retrograde, and we've got the moon in the seventh, or we've got the moon in the house in the sign that represents the seventh. What do we have next? Then, and Venus is Venus is the ruler of the spirit, Mars is the ruler of the and Saturn is the ruler of the fortune. Note how the ruler of the part of fortune is with the ruler of the ascendant and with the sun, which represents fame, right? Sun represents fame. Saturn is the ruler of the 10th based on this cusp, on this cusp distribution, and the ruler of the part of fortune. So we've got a strong possibility of fame, but what we have is that this is what would come out when the fame would happen, right? This is already in there, but as a result of prominence, as a result of being in a highly reputable position, these things, and I'm not seeing the Pluto, I am seeing the Pluto, but all of this stuff would be allowed to run amok because the person is in power. This is a tyrant's chart. This is the chart of a tyrant. Tyrants don't usually have any friends. And so we've got this misanthropic tyrant, highly narcissistic, right? All this stuff in Leo ruled by the sun. So we've got this raging malignant narcissist, right? There's the malignant part and there's the narcissist part, right? So we've got a malignant narcissist here and we've got this 11th house thing. So somehow the 11th house was able to give something. It was able to give hopes and wishes and dreams, because note how the exaltation ruler is with the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the part of fortune, right? So the exaltation ruler of the 11th was able to do it, even if the 11th ruler might not have been able to. This woman she had started singing since she was a kid, so we don't know if this was her dream. Oh, yeah, we know music was the dream, right? Libra, right? So we can pretty much guess that music was the dream. We also know that her father really pushed her into this, and that she started singing in church, and her father was a major figure. Note that you've got the significator for father down here with the fourth house ruler. So we've got both significators for father in between both of them. So there could have been abuse in that area too. Or there could have been so much being spoiled, making her into such a little princess that he created a monster. It could also be that. But she was, whatever it was forged by the dad, probably. Let's look at another one of the parts. Native among men and honored among men. Let's see, loved by men and how they hate them. There was another one that was kind of about people liking you. Concupiscence and zeal, part of faith, friends. Let's see what it looks like with friends for her. Moon to Mercury. Moon to Mercury. So, is that day and night? I think it does say day and night. Yeah, day and night, moon to Mercury. So that's back 120, and forward 14. Back 120 and forward 14. So it's either at the very end. Oh, it's in Pisces. It's in the beginning of Pisces. So because if that's 2946, that's where the sun and moon. Oh yeah, okay. So it's at the beginning of Pisces. It's probably like in the second degree of Pisces. Okay, so it's in Pisces, the ruler of friendship. Note that once again, that the Jupiter is in the 7th house, which is the house of open enemies. Now, Jupiter is the ruler of the 7th. Kathleen Battle has never been married. No one can get along with this bitch, right? So she's never been married. So this Jupiter, so we've got another thing here where the Jupiter isn't necessarily is giving the mixed results, shall we say. It's giving 10th house results, right? This woman got to the highest level, and note that the 7th house is the 10th from the 10th. So we've got the ruler of the 10th in the 10th from the 10th, because Pisces is intercepted in the 10th. So we've got this angular 10th house chart, right? This chart, the 10th house ruler, that and the Saturn, those are the only two angular planets in the chart based on this distribution. Trine with Saturn, easy malefic. Yes, and the trine with Saturn, even though it's separating, that means that the ruler of the 10th is trining the part of fortune, who is in the 10th. The ruler of the part of fortune, and the part of fortune is in the 10th. So this chart is supposed to get pretty high in life. That part we've got. That part we figured out, that this chart should get relatively high in life. It's basically, though, do they have any friends? For the ruler of the part of friends to be in, for the ruler part of friends to be in the 7th isn't the best thing. I mean, it's angular, so it says, hey, whether or not they have friends is an important aspect to this life. And I would say probably not. I would say more than likely it's really the work life. It's the work life that took over this person. I think work is all this person really cared about. Any comments or questions about that? I'm confused because Jupiter is opposite the ascendant and someone that is friendly, generous, thoughtful person. However, remember, Jupiter isn't ruler of the ascendant. So Jupiter isn't the representative of the person, right? So the planet that represents the person is Mercury and the moon, right? Who's with Jupiter. But remember, the moon is the part of us that's we can feel but not necessarily see, right? So me talking fast and stumbling over my words is an aspect of my moon in Aries that you can't necessarily see, but you can certainly feel. My blinding speed, that's my moon in Aries aspect, and moon trine Mercury, and moon sextile Jupiter. And so my quick thinking and quick speaking and fumbling over words and having to go back and say the correct word, that is my moon. But you can't see it. But it's in there. So this moon is working for this Jupiter, right? But knowing that the Jupiter is the ruler of the 10th and in the 7th, even though, so because this person, Jupiter didn't bring marriage, right? Jupiter's in the ruler of the 7th in the 7th, but he didn't bring marriage. What's that about, right? So he's bringing something else. And the 7th house also represents contentions and divorces and feuds. And it can bring in, and Jupiter makes things bigger. And the 7th house is the house of your open enemy. Unreliable results. Yes, certainly unreliable. Certainly. I mean, I never even heard in the entire time that, because I was a voice student. I was a voice student when Kathy Battle I saw Kathy Battle sing a recital in 1984 before she got really famous. So she must have been like 84, 85 when she got really famous. And I remember it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen or heard. And wow, what an amazing singer she was. Yeah, no, there's nothing about marriage or even, there's nothing about marriage or even dating in the Wikipedia. I think that this person wants, think about how both the sun and Saturn can isolate. The sun, think of how lonely it is on the throne, right? The sun is royalty. So think of what a lonely life separate from everyone else, a life on the throne is. And then think of the 12th house and how isolated, and how Saturn is called the author of solitariness, right? So this person really couldn't, so that's a difference too. Once again, so this Jupiter, what I think it was going on is there's all this fire going on and the sun is involved. There's a light switch that this person turned on. And they turned on the light switch and they were the moon Jupiter. And then they turned on the switch. It was one of those rotating switches. And the actual home station is the Pluto, Sun, Mercury, Saturn. But then they could actually turn the switch, and when they were in front of the public, then they gave the moon Jupiter. And when they were performing for the public, they gave this moon Jupiter. You should really watch, Kathy. You should find something. There's a Don Giovanni with her singing Zerlina from the 80s when she's right in kind of the middle of her fame. And you should watch kind of the arch sugary sweet. Remember, Jupiter rules the sweet. The arch sugary sweet presentation that she would adopt when she would sing. And I think that's what you're seeing, Diana, is you're seeing how the light switch turned to the sugary sweet, and looked like that. But when we got past that frontal layer, when we got past the topsoil, then we got down to where the Sun, Mercury, Saturn was. And think about the kind of soil. It's on the 4th house. The 4th house is the soil, right? The 4th house is the ground, the soil. What kind of soil would that be? Saturn is cold and dry. Sun is hot and dry. Mercury becomes whoever he's with. That's soil that cannot be tilled, right? That's soil that you wouldn't put a seed in that soil ever, in my opinion. I don't think anybody could get close to her. I don't think anybody, there's a story about she had a live-in maid, and there was something about the directions that Kathy Battle gave about the Christmas directions. And the maid didn't understand them fully. And so the maid put the Christmas directions, the Christmas lights up onto the tree. Kathy Battle comes home and she goes, that's not what I told you to do. I told you to do blah, 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 blah. Now do that. And so the woman spends 2 hours fixing the tree exactly as she does. And she says, okay, I'm done. She goes, good, you're fired. This is what I'm talking about. And there are worse stories, because there are worse, ugly, horrible stories. Also, you haven't yet mentioned Neptune square MC, which makes someone idealistic, but also misunderstood and controversial. I don't actually look at the, actually it's trining. Isn't it trining the MC? You said Neptune, right? It's kind of wide. Hold on. Wait, what did you say?
Yeah, I think it's Neptune in the 5th house, right next to Mars.
Square the MC, but the MC is at 23.
Oh, yeah, so that's
it's a trine, and it would be a trine. It's a little too far. It's a little bit too far. But I think what we could be getting, ascendant ruler combust besieged, just like she didn't have a chance. Exactly. It's exactly that. And like I said, the father created this monster, either through abuse or through placation. The father created this monster, right? Both significators are there. What I'm thinking is that this person, notice how the Mars is the ruler of the 6th, and that's Mars's favorite house. Aside from the houses that he rules, that's his joy. Mars likes a fight. Mars likes a fight. Note how Mars is the ruler of the 11th. Note how Mars is connecting with the ruler of the 7th. Note how the ruler of the 3rd just left Mars. all of the social houses are involved with Mars. Thus, this Mars Neptune, and like, once again, when you're talking about nobody watch me sing because I don't want you to see my jaw shaking, you're in the realm of nonsense, right? And that's Neptune, right? That's you're in the realm of delusion, illusion, glamour, nonsense, idiocy, right? When people will do it, right? She's powerful enough that people will do it. Nobody look at me while I sing. Okay. Even the fucking conductor will do it. That is what I think the Mars Pluto is kind of. Obviously, it's also the authoritarian nature of the Sun and Saturn, right? Sun is the ruler, Saturn is Father Time, right? So there's that. This person would be highly severe, highly authoritarian. There would be rules for everything, in my opinion. And partially because this Mars, look at the Mars is in the 5th house of what I enjoy. This person likes to fight. This person likes to create reasons to fight, in my opinion, and can't get along with anybody. And so, I mean, it's fascinating. I was just looking at the entire page of her Wikipedia, and it's interesting. It doesn't go into how hated she was, but it also doesn't say anything about any kind of relationships at all, except for collaborative work relationships. This person really, the only thing that they could make work in their life was work and money, and work and money and singing and stuff of that nature. Any more questions? I'm going to stop the share here.